Let's talk some football, shall we? The Falcons offense has been stellar this season, and yesterday they just kept rolling in their 38-19 win over the Cardinals. This was their 7th game this season with at least 30 points as Matty Ice found Taylor Gabriel for 2 TDs. The Falcons are now 7-4, their best start through 11 games since 2012 when they went to the NFC Championship game. Merrill Hodge in the house. Good day.
Okay, how are you?
What's going on, man?
Always good to see you. Let's get into this. Are the Falcons Super Bowl contenders?
Wow, if there's any doubt. You know, actually, what last week showed is there are so many teams that are potential Super Bowl teams. You know, and that really should give a lot of football fans, you know, hope and excitement. There is no one dominant team. I don't care what you picked. I don't care if we picked the Cowboys, the Patriots, Seattle, even though they lost. There's no dominant team. There's no team that says, that's everybody's got to beat that. Nothing like that. In fact, Tampa in that Seattle game was a great example of those teams like Tampa that are just right on the edge. You know, they start playing a little better or stay at the level they played at yesterday, they could clearly be in the NFC Championship game, as well as Seattle. So, to me, Atlanta Falcons, there's no doubt. The one hiccup I keep seeing, just when I'm about to say they are as complete as we have in the NFL, is they get hammered like they did 2 weeks ago against Philadelphia. And that always brings doubt because there's going to be a team that's going to bring that to the party in the playoffs. So that's the only hiccup. However, there's nobody without flaws. So I don't think there's any question offensively with all the phases they have the most phases in all of football. That rolls and that keeps rolling during the playoffs. Sure, they're playoff worthy and Super Bowl worthy.
I think, obviously you're right, but I think that's the NFL generally year in and year out. Not that there aren't sometimes teams where you go, no one's messing with them. But we all know, and I've seen it from my New York Football Giants twice in recent years, where if you're good enough to get in and you get hot at the right time and you get a little lucky, because the Giants also got lucky on their runs, you can win a Super Bowl. I'm going to take that off the table because then you can include 10, 12, 15 teams who, if they got hot, they could do it. I don't think they are. And I base it just on the kind of a gut reaction. If the team I root for is playing the Falcons, I think they got a good shot to win. If they're playing a healthy Patriots or the Cowboys or Seattle, I'm more nervous. So if I had to, I do this a lot, plot them on a bell curve, who are the actual teams on the far right end, the actual good teams, I don't put the Falcons quite there because of the defense. And so I say by that standard, they're not Super Bowl contenders.
Well, based on your conventional thinking, you're not wrong. But based on the facts of this season, I think you're wrong. And here's why. When I think about the Atlanta Falcons, they're the worst pass defense in the NFL. They rank dead last. We understand that. Not so badly against the run. They're actually top 10 against the run, 10th to be exact. But they were horrible against the pass. The flip side is that their running game is not that bad with Devontae Freeman. This kid, Taylor Gabriel, is something special. He's a speedster, and I love the way what I saw from him yesterday. Their passing attack is big time with Julio Jones. Mohamed Sanu coming over from Cincinnati. That's been a welcomed acquisition to this team. And so when I look at it from that perspective, and I see how high-powered they are offensively, as putrid as they may be against the pass defensively, well, what's the problem with the Cowboys? Can you get at the pass? And as a result, doesn't it expose your secondary? Well, what's the problem with Seattle? Well, your defense is elite, but offensively, you're struggling right now because you can't protect your quarterback, and your running game is suspect. And so when we look at the rest of the NFC, if there was a team that was big time on offense and decent on defense, or big time on defense and decent on offense, then all right, that's a given. But it just seems like everywhere you look within the NFC, everybody's this one way in one category and down here in the other category, whether it's offense or defensively. It's like a damn roller coaster ride. And so to me, that's what makes it interesting with Atlanta, because offensively, they're as explosive as anybody in the NFC. And defensively, they're not. And the only team to offset that is Seattle, whose defense is elite, but whose offense is suspect. So then you got the Dallas Cowboys with their running game. That's how I look at it. Am I wrong?
No, and actually both of you hit great points, which if you put down and listen to you, and you filter down then who has the least amount of flaws is what we're coming down to. Who has the least amount of flaws?
Right.
the Dallas Cowboys. I know you don't want to hear it.
Yep.
I know you don't want to hear it, my brother.
Right.
But that's who has the least amount of flaws.
It's a terrible world.
How did
I wake up into this nightmare world where the Cowboys are the best team?
I love waking up every Monday knowing I think the Cowboys are still the best team because I'm going to see Stephen A. on Monday.
They're going to find a way. They're going to mess this up. Cowboys going to mess this up.
All they got to do is lose to Minnesota at Minnesota, and then the Giants, if they beat the Steelers, they could take the division the following week.
He's warning it because you get specific. I don't know when it's going to happen,
when
but they
Merrill
will
is a believer,
fall.
This is not good.
I know, this scares me. This scares me. He did it on purpose.
We thought you were going to say the defense was suspect.
Don't you know?
We didn't go there.
Listen, he likes to mess with me. Tim Kirkjian likes to mess with me. All of these guys love messing with me. He did this just to mess with me.
All right.
They're going to fall.
Colin Kaepernick was booed Sunday when he took the field in Miami, and it wasn't just because he was in front of the Dolphins' home crowd. Miami is home to a large community of Cuban exiles that are outraged over Kaepernick's comments supporting the man they consider a brutal oppressor, the now deceased Cuban leader Fidel Castro, who died Friday. During a conference call with Miami reporters on Wednesday, Kaepernick defended his choice to wear a T-shirt depicting a meeting between Malcolm X and Castro, praising the dictator for investing in Cuba's education system as opposed to the American investment in the prison system. He spoke to reporters after the 49ers lost and expounded on those remarks, which he said were taken out of context. Quote, I agree with the investment in education. I also agree with the investment in free universal health care, as well as the involvement in helping end apartheid in South Africa. I would hope that everybody agrees those things are good things in trying to push that false narrative that I was a supporter of the oppressive things that he did is just not true. Max, your reaction.
I supported Kaepernick largely in his protest. Mm-hmm. It is not okay to lionize Fidel Castro in any way. And it's not, Molly, that Cuban exiles consider him a brutal dictator. It's that he was one. That's what he was. And this revisionist history using the relativism of world governments and how governments don't always behave properly, and even bad governments do some good things. It's absurd to focus or even mention that in his case. It's absurd. You cannot support Castro. Certainly not public. This is not Castro during the Cuban Revolution, who was seen by many, for good reason, as a champion of the people. We have more information since then. He became a communist dictator. And for people like Colin Kaepernick, little knowledge is dangerous. Either he's read a couple books on the subject and that's everything he knows about it, or he knows a lot about the subject and doesn't have the ability to properly process the information. I'm not saying America love it or leave it. I don't go with that crowd. I say America love it or change it. But the fact is, and we all know the history toward people of color in this country, the terrible history and the ongoing struggle. And yet, what we don't see are people risking their lives on rafts to get to Cuba. But we do see that going the other way. And I would quote Dan Le Batard's response on Twitter yesterday to Jill Stein, the presidential candidate, who sent out a tweet lionizing Castro. Get all the way the hell out of here, lady. And I would say to Kaepernick, with the Castro support in any way, get all the way the hell out of here. If Kaepernick's point is that capitalism has its problems, I would tell him the old expression: capitalism is the worst system, except for every other system in the history of the world. Get all the way the hell out of here with support for a brutal communist dictator.
Before I engage in condemnation about the flaming hypocrite that Colin Kaepernick is, let me cut him a break in this regard. From a black perspective, it matters to a lot of black people. He's not lying about that to a lot of black people. It matters that Fidel Castro met in Harlem with Malcolm X in 1960. It matters that Fidel Castro sent 25,000 troops to Angola to fight, to oppose the old apartheid government of South Africa. It matters to black people that when Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years of incarceration, unfairly, as we all know, that one of the first things that he did in 1991 was travel to Cuba to thank Fidel Castro and the Cuban people for their support. So if you are black and you see support from Malcolm X and you see support from Nelson Mandela, it resonates. It gives you cause to pause. Having said all of that, here's where we go awry. And I would defer to the great column in last Friday's paper in the Miami Herald by Armando Salguero, who writes for the Miami Herald, who is of Cuban descent, along with our friend Dan Le Batard, who I love dearly. Let's be clear. I am not Cuban. They are. And if anybody can speak to their suffering, no matter how eloquent you sound, no matter how eloquent I might try to sound, or you for that matter, Molly, nobody can speak to the suffering of the Cuban people better than them, their ancestry, the people that are connected to them. And I say when you hear them talk about this dictatorship, this regime, you're talking about dungeons, you're talking about firing squads, you're talking about murder, you're talking about, what is this here? The Human Rights Watch. According to the Human Rights Watch, Cuban citizens have been systematically deprived of their fundamental rights to free expression, privacy, association, assembly, movement, and due process of law. You know, when you hear those kind of things, and you're Colin Kaepernick, and you're talking about the stuff that he's talking about, when your sorry, pathetic behind didn't even have the decency to register to vote, to activate yourself in this election. You know, it's a damn crime that you would even sit up there. I told you to shave that damn afro. Stop acting like you're a militant. You're ignorant. And that's the bottom line. I'm not questioning his intelligence. I'm saying ignorance on the part is he picks and chooses what he wants to disseminate. I'm not saying he doesn't know any better. I'm accusing him of knowing better and not caring. He only cares about what he cares about as opposed to what's real. And when you've got the Cuban folks throughout the United States of America and beyond speaking about how vile this man was and his regime was since 1959, even though he took over, the coup where he got the previous regime out of there and they were torturous, to ignore all of that because of things that you want to isolate and compartmentalize. It's a crime against those people because it reeks of insensitivity. It's incredibly alarming that Colin Kaepernick to choose to do such a thing. And I was happy that Armando Salguero got on him about it.
I want to respond to one thing you said. Of course, no one can know what the Cuban people go through except for the Cuban people who went through it and their families. But my point of view is people of goodwill all around the world, if Cuban people are being brutally repressed, then we are all Cuban. If little girls are being kidnapped in Nigeria, then I'm Nigerian.
Totally.
If this country wants to make Muslims register, then I'm Muslim.
Well, what I'm saying is
I think people with social conscience have to adopt that position.
You're right. They have to, and then I'll come to you, Molly. You're right. They have to adopt a position. All I was trying to say is that when those very people are in your presence and they can speak to their suffering, there's an elevated and heightened level of sensitivity that from a human perspective, I believe you're obligated to recognize. And the fact that his refusal to recognize that and, to spout and disseminate his message, to me, reeks of insensitivity, and it's a damn shame. Go ahead, Molly. I'm sorry.
I also think one thing that he pointed out was Fidel Castro invested in their education system, and they have high literacy rates, which they do. But he also controlled what they were able to read, and they didn't have internet access. And he talked about our prison system, which, yes, it's flawed and it's broken, and how it separates families. Fidel Castro also separated families. I don't know what it's like to be Cuban American, but I know what it's like to have family under communism and to get up early in the morning and send medical supplies and try to send food and try to send money and have it intervene and them calling and crying on the phone. What this man did, Fidel Castro, is he oppressed his people for nearly 6 decades. That legacy is firing squads, it's poverty, it's denying human rights. And last I checked, Cuban Americans are people of color. So I understand when you're talking about African Americans and how there's some sympathy in what he did with apartheid, in which I understand.
Some folks feel that way, not all of us.
But these are also people of color. So when he's going to go out and speak on these subjects, he can't have the surface level knowledge. It's so ill-informed, it's so insensitive, and it's so disrespectful.
Literacy rates are self-reported by the Cuban government.
That's
you
right.
Believe what the Cuban government says?
Exactly. By the way, last point, and I think this is a very, very important point to make, not to get too political, but our president, Barack Obama, reopened diplomatic relations with Cuba, right? Well, what happened in this election? Because we know that Hillary Clinton was an extension of the Obama administration, the Obama era. Well, what happens? They won Florida. The Republicans won Florida, in large part because the Cubans came out and supported something different. In other words, what I'm trying to say is these folks did not want these diplomatic relations
that's a larger conversation.
This is a larger conversation
for another
but that's
forum,
the point
probably.
Yes.
I want to leave us with one visual because I was watching this coverage closely on Saturday morning, and some former Cuban exiles were talking about how they would pour Kool-Aid packets into envelopes to send over just so their family could get calories. So just to put this in perspective of how dire it was in this country.